The beginnings of Byzantine architecture are dated to Constantine's time and are directly related to the Roman Empire's architecture. The architecture of the Roman Empire suffered significant changes after Constantine's acceptance of Christianity. During the Middle Ages, it would separate itself and become a distinct artistic and cultural phenomenon. Byzantine architecture flourished in a region including the areas of Italy, Greece, Asia Minor, and Syria. It went on to influence medieval architecture, and even the architecture to this day. The most important manifestations of this development are Byzantine churches, known for their massive domes and golden mosaics. The adoption of Christianity as the official religion of the Roman Empire signaled the beginning of one of the most influential developments in the history of architecture. The early development of Byzantine church architecture is marked by the emergence of a timber-roofed basilica. This type of church dominated church construction on the coasts of the eastern Mediterranean from the 4th to the 6th century. Santa Sabina in Rome, built between 422 and 432, is a typical example of this type of church. The 6th century marked the turn towards vaulted churches, peaking with the unprecedented example of Byzantine ingenuity, Hagia Sophia, built between 532 and 537. The so-called Middle Byzantine period marked the diversification of Byzantine church architecture. The development of the theology of images after the iconoclasm affected the development of a standardized program of decoration and architectural design. Emerging in the 9th century, the type of the cross-in square church was commonly used in Greece and Asia Minor for more than 5 centuries. One of the earliest examples is found at the monastery of Hosius Lucas in Greece, built between 946 and 955. Whatever type they were, the enormous amount of churches built by Byzantines reflects the central role of the Christian religion in the organization of the Roman state from the 4th century. No imperial or noble burials have survived intact in Constantinople, but numerous texts testify to the impressive dimensions of the tombs and their settings. The most common settings for burial were places either in the vicinity of the churches or in the churches themselves. As was the Byzantine custom, graves and sarcophagi were found in the narthex of the church and annexed chapels. An early important example of the Byzantine funerary architecture and the monumental dimensions is the Church of Holy Apostles in Constantinople. It was originally made as a resting place of Emperor Constantine, dedicating the center of the church to his tomb. Outside of the church, there were 12 sarcophagi that were supposed to house the bodies of all of the 12 apostles. Sandwiched between the two older churches of the Pantocrator Monastery of Constantinople is the funeral chapel of the Imperial Komnenos family. In this two-domed church, the imperial tombs were clustered beneath the western dome. One arcosolium survives in the western hall. Arcosoli was set aside for distinguished members of the family, though unclear for whom. The western tomb may have been intended for the tombs of John II and his wife Irene. Their son Manuel I was buried here in 1180. Described as a lavish tomb, his grave incorporated an opus sectile floor, the relic of the Stone of Unction, and a tomb marker of dark stone topped by 7 domes. Martyrium is a centrally planned structure, usually built over the tomb of a Christian martyr. Martyria had no standard architectural plan, and are found in a wide variety of designs, such as circular, polygonal, or cross-shaped. There was often a sunken floor, bringing the faithful closer to the remains of the saint. Constantine initiated the construction of monumental buildings built in memory of people and events related to Christianity. First of Constantine's monumental martyria is St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, built around 324. The focal point of the basilica was a ciborium beneath which was the tomb of the Apostle Peter. Though these buildings played a lesser role in the development of Byzantine architecture, they are important to the development of the cult of relics and the construction of pilgrimage sites. Similarly, baptisteries are exclusively Christian buildings developed from earlier Roman religious architecture. The baptistery was commonly octagonal in plan and used as a place where the sacrament of baptism was administered. It was roofed with a dome, the symbol of the heavenly realm. The baptismal font was usually octagonal as well, and encircled by columns and an ambulatory. They represent an example of early Christian and Byzantine architecture, since by the 10th century they were omitted entirely by some places. Compared to the number of churches and monasteries influencing the buildings to this day, it seems as if profane Byzantine architecture was pushed aside. Therefore, it must be noted that Byzantines, throughout their more than 1,000-year-long history, were masters of architectural and urban organization. They built cities, palaces, houses, and public infrastructure, such as aqueducts of massive proportions. As Byzantine society became more inward-turning, through time public architecture almost exclusively focused on defensive structures. Periods of ruralization, urban revivals forming new towns, reconfiguring of ancient cities, and migrations shaped the development of profane architecture. Unfortunately, most of the examples that remain to this day are in ruins. Constant inhabitation and wars after the fall of the Byzantine Empire played a big role in the disappearance of these structures. Despite this, there are some samples that help in the reconstruction of what had been lost to history. Next to nothing is known about the palaces of Byzantine aristocracy, whether in Constantinople or elsewhere. Illuminated manuscripts, literary descriptions, and hints in contemporary writings all provide unreliable information about what a Byzantine palace might have looked like. Considering that the Imperial Palace in Constantinople is almost non-existent, a great example of palace building can be noted in the Peloponnese city of Mistras. Overlooking the square of Anahora is the palace complex of Mistra and the residency of the city's governor and later of the Byzantine despots. This L-shaped building had 4 construction phases between the 13th and 15th centuries. During the era of Emperor Andronikos II, the original Frankish palace was expanded with a 2-story construction following Byzantine tradition. The next extension was undertaken in the second half of the 14th century, during the era of the despot Manuel Kantakesnos. The last Byzantine building phase included a 3-story building that combines elements of Western and Byzantine architecture. It is attributed to the Emperor Manuel II Palaeologus, who stayed in Mistras for long periods in the years 1408 and 1415. A magnificent throne room was located on the uppermost floor of this extension, with a balcony overlooking the square. The domestic Byzantine architecture seems to follow old traditions from the beginning of the Roman Empire. The dwellings of the poor, presumably hovels and farmhouses, are unknown. Our knowledge of the middle-class dwellings is broader, but limited to a handful of residencies and commercial buildings excavated in a few Greek cities. A number of 12th century houses excavated on the Athenian Agora provide us with significant examples. These houses are indistinguishable from the 5th century houses built on the Agora, as well as the 2nd century houses in Dura Europos, or 1st century houses in Delos and Priene. An Athenian city house formed roughly a square block with a courtyard in the centre as a source of light and air. Simpler houses have been found at Corinth, composed of 2 or 3 rectangular rooms. In certain cases, more elaborate houses had upper floors, but the main characteristics of these houses are the small rooms and poor plan organisation. The fortification of Byzantine cities is best attested in Constantinople's land walls built in several different phases. The main wall is 4 miles long, 30 feet tall, and 16 feet wide. Additionally, it is preceded by another wall with a 60-foot wide moat. The main wall had 96 towers and 6 gates used to enter the city. This is perhaps the first time in the Middle Ages that the double enceinte had been used. In the later Middle Ages, this system of fortifications became a large part of military history in Western Europe. Other examples of Byzantine walls that survive to this day are the sea walls, the walls of Blackany, the Golden Gate, and the so-called Marble Tower. The great building campaigns of fortifications slowed down after the 6th century. On the eastern borders of the empire, which suffered the heaviest blows in Byzantine history, defensive structures consisted of individual fortresses and small fortified towns. An interesting example of Byzantine fortifications are the towers built all over the empire. Written sources reveal an interesting series of Byzantine defensive structures made up of towers and lined up as a beacon system. This beacon system was used for communication between the eastern border of Asia Minor and Constantinople. These towers communicated with smoke signals, carrying a message from one station to the other. Based on the sources, it took an hour to carry the message from the first station to the last. The sources mention 9 stops from the eastern border: Lulon, Mount Argius, Izamus, Agelon, Mount Mamas, Mount Kyrazos, Mount Mokylos, Mount St. Auxentius, and Pharos. Except the first and last station, other stations were on top of hills and mountains. Lulon was a significant border fortress in the north of Taurus. The last station was Pharos, the lighthouse of Constantinople, named after the Alexandrian lighthouse. To this day, only the first 2 and last can be located.